During his briefing to the Security Council, Hans Gramberg confirms that peace in Yemen requires uncomfortable compromises. The United Nations warns that aid cuts for Yemen will aggravate humanitarian crisis in the country. For 7 years now, tribe has proven to be a considerable force in the battle against Houthi militia. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news with me, Rushan Fouad. Hans Gramberg, UN Special Envoy to Yemen, stressed during a meeting for the Security Council that the conflict could spiral out of control. He added that nobody was excluded from the conflict in Yemen.
Mr. President, the continued military escalation of the conflict in Yemen has escaped no one. I am here today to discuss these worrying developments and to share with you my efforts to try and reverse this trajectory and initiate a long-delayed political process.
In the same briefing, Gramberg said that the war has also damaged Yemen's economy severely, especially in the Houthi-controlled areas. This has added to the trouble of people.
Yemen's war continues to be fought also in the economic arena, with warring sides battling over resources, trade flows, and monetary policy. The impact of this aspect of the war continues to irrefutably hit Yemen's population as a whole. The past month has seen particularly severe shortages in fuel and oil derivatives, notably in areas controlled by Ansarallah, putting unprecedented strain on the everyday lives of people.
Gramberg concluded his briefing that despite the huge challenges before bringing about peace in the country, there is still a way out. The way out, according to him, is an inclusive, political and immediate de-escalation.
Despite all these challenges, Mr. President, there is a way out of this war. Allowing the war to continue is a choice, and so is ending it. We all know that ending it will not be easy, but I firmly believe that it is possible.
During the meeting, Richard Mills, a representative of the United States, denounced Houthi attacks. He said all parties must de-escalate the current situation and participate in a United Nations-led peace process. The American official stressed the need to return to talks, calling on all parties to cooperate with the special envoy.
The Houthis have made it clear they seek to disrupt regional security, target civilian sites, and disrupt maritime commerce. We must do more to counter such attacks with a unified voice, including by imposing tangible costs.
As to the British representative to the UN, Barbara Woodward, she noted that there remains no military solution to the conflict in Yemen. She called upon all parties to de-escalate urgently and to engage with the new United Nations-led peace process.
The UK condemns, in the strongest terms, the Houthis' repeated terror attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure, against Yemenis and Yemen's neighbors.
For his part, Dmitry Polansky from the Russian Federation expressed serious concerns about attacks on civilians in Yemen and attempts to shift the conflict into neighboring countries. He reiterated that the fresh escalation of violence presents a threat to regional security and urged all parties to respect international humanitarian law. He also voiced concern about the humanitarian situation and called on all parties to provide unimpeded access to aid deliveries. The Yemeni ambassador to the UN, Abdullah El-Saadi, said during the meeting of the UN Security Council that Houthi militia continues to choose war over peace. He said the rebels are undermining the country and the region, persisting in aggression against the Yemeni people, and making the road ahead more costly in economic, political, and human terms. He emphasized that the Yemen government's support for all efforts for sustainable peace. During the meeting of the UN Security Council on Yemen, Martin Griffiths, the UN Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, said that more than 650 civilian casualties were reported in January, by far highest toll in at least 3 years. Meanwhile, he warned against the dwindling funding for the humanitarian aid in the country. More is in the following report.
Yemenis could face greater cuts in humanitarian aid in the coming months as a result of budget shortfalls, which could slash food ratios in a country where millions are starving, according to the UN's humanitarian chief. Martin Griffiths informed the United Nations Security Council that roughly two-thirds of major UN aid programs had already been scaled back or closed by the end of January.
By far the biggest challenge for aid agencies right now is funding. The humanitarian operation, a lifeline for millions of people across Yemen and for these many years, is about to start doing a lot less. Aid agencies are quickly running out of money, forcing them to slash life-saving programs. And by the end of January, nearly two-thirds of major UN aid programs had already scaled back or closed altogether.
According to UN data, only 58% of the required funding for the United Nations 2021 Humanitarian Response Plan were received from contributors. Conflicting demands on donors as well as concerns about assistance, sabotage in Yemen. The nearly 7-year war between Yemen's Iran-backed Houthi rebels and the Saudi-led coalition, as well as the following economic collapse, has left 80% of the country's population in need of assistance. Since January, the World Food Programme has lowered ratios for 8 million of the 13 million people it feeds each month, and Griffiths says ratios may be cut even more in March, if not completely terminated.
In December, the World Food Programme, reduced food rations for 8 million people. And starting next month, those 8 million people may get no food at all, or just a reduced ration. In March, we may also have to cancel most UN humanitarian flights in Yemen, which would cause enormous problems for the aid operation.
Efforts to reach an agreement on a ceasefire have deteriorated as the warring parties intensify military operations and refuse to compromise. The only way out of the people's suffering and to end the war in Yemen is by ending the war.
The government forces defeated the Houthi militia in new locations south of Ma'rib. A military source reported that the government forces were able to defeat the Houthi militia from several locations in El-Bur and El-Faliha. It added that coalition warplanes targeted militia sites on the same front, inflicting huge human and material losses on them. 5 Houthi militia fighters were killed near the lines of contact with the joint forces in Taz Governorate, Western Yemen. The military media of the joint forces reported that reconnaissance units had spotted a Houthi combat vehicle, confirming the destruction of the vehicle and the killing of 5 Houthi militia fighters on board. Government forces liberated new positions in the Directorate of Safra in Saada Governorate, Northern Yemen. A military source said that the government forces managed to liberate these positions through an lightning attack, which resulted in the killing and wounding of many Houthi militants. The source added the artillery of the government forces targeted the Houthi militia's reinforcements and shelled their movements. The tribes in Yemen is considered to be linked to the national identity. It is the backbone for the Yemeni solidarity and steadfastness. The tribes had solidified their rule during the war in gathering the Yemenis against the Houthi rebels and remaining as a solid rock against the rebellious attempts. More is in the following report.
The tribe in Yemen is a solid war against which the ambitions of the Houthi rebels are shattered since the beginning of 2015 and beyond. Victory for the Republic and its national value are the most prominent features for Ma'rib tribes that refuse to submit to the new imams. The tribesmen of Ma'rib and Al-Jawf defended themselves with their personal weapons and stood in pride with strong determination to restore the state and to deter the militia. They made great sacrifices to restore the institutions so that the government forces and popular resistance were formed in their provinces again, to begin a new journey from the stage of restoring the homeland from the grip of the Iran-backed militia. While the sons of Ma'rib tribes were engaged in confrontations with the Houthi militia in Sirwah and Al-Jufaina districts, the sons of Al-Jawf tribes gathered in the desert of churches with the aim of restoring their governorate from the militia's grip. The tribes didn't leave the land of the field for a single moment over the 7 years. Some of them stood face to face, challenging the militia for years. as in the case of Jabal Murad, who were armed with their personal weapons. Other tribes still support the heroes of the government forces side by side on all fronts of the fighting, making great sacrifices. They are aware of the Houthi threat that beset them and push Yemen towards the abyss. As a result, the tribe pushed with all its might during the recent bursts on the outskirts of Marib. They broke and thwarted the dreams of the Iranian-backed militia who are still pressing to enter the oil-rich Marib.
During the past 24 hours, coalition fighters carried out about 17 operations, targeting Houthi militia fortifications in Ma'rib and Hajjah. The coalition pointed out that the operations destroyed 14 Houthi vehicles and killed dozens of militia members. Coming next. In the time of war, Yemeni children determined to receive education even in displaced camps.
هذا هو محل استهداف الحواث الذين استهدفوا المواطنين وهم نائمين. هذا هو الصاروخ. من الساعة 4 ما سمعنا الضربة من الحوثيين في المخيم. هذا يعني استشهدوا أولاد عمي، هذا استشهدوا يعني أخواني كلهم، يعني شوف يعني الدم في الخيم. الدم في الخيم يعني في كل مكان، يعني رؤوسهم ما التقوش، الراس ما التقاش، الراس ما التقاش. الحمد لله بالحمد.
Welcome back. The International Organization for Migration said the situation in Yemen has steadily deteriorated as a result of instability and increased fighting between multiple groups. According to the IOM, the number of displaced people in Yemen has increased since the beginning of this year to 3,504 families, representing more than 18,000 individuals. The following report gives more details on this.
Year after year, Houthi rebels are causing the displacement of tens of thousands of Yemenis, uprooting them from their areas and villages, imposing a life of displacement on them. The insistence of the Houthi militia to create new fighting fronts renews the displacement cases throughout Yemen and exacerbates the humanitarian crisis in the country. The International Organization for Migration announced the number of displaced people affected by the war, which has reached more than 50,000 displaced people in 13 Yemeni governorates since the beginning of the year 2021. According to the organization, more than 24,500 people have been displaced in Ma'rib Governorate during the year 2021 to areas inside Surweh, the city of Ma'rib, and to the rest of the governorates. As the front lines in Ma'rib shift and move closer to densely populated areas, UNHCR has warned that the lives of an estimated more than 1 million internally displaced people are at risk, especially as access to humanitarian aid becomes more difficult for them. According to UNHCR, the new displacements are exacerbating existing humanitarian needs, dramatically compounding the need for shelter, basic household items, hygiene facilities, education and protection services, especially for children. Communities are being repeatedly displaced and arriving to displacement sites in dire need of the most basics. Now you can find up to 40 people with no choice but to share one small tent. And behind these dilapidated tents, there are stories that tell of endless daily suffering for a large number of displaced families, most of whom are in dire need of food, water, medicine, and a housing that protects them from heat and cold and preserves their dignity. Living in peace is a dream that these displaced people call for, hoping that they will find it one day.
Mobile schools are a way to mitigate the shortage in education facilities during war. The mobile schools go through the camps of the displaced people in Yemen to educate students in order to build their country.
for reducing the suffering experienced by displaced students in the camps and their inability to enroll in schools to continue their education. An educational initiative with a mobile cart funded by the Kuwaiti Al-Rahma Association was launched recently.
This work will meet the needs of students for education, especially displaced children, to enable them to continue their education.
Idris School, a voluntary charitable educational project that comes within emergency situations and aims to reach approximately 90 of these displaced students in displacement camps to enable them to continue their education.
This project that is included in the Education Emergency Plan, which targets the students who are deprived from education because of the displacement life which is forced on them and the war, and were forced to flee these camps, deprived from their right to go to school. This mobile Idris School is an educational initiative that targets students in these camps to educate them. These students are in the early stage of education from year 1 to year 4. The schools educate them the main subjects like religion, Arabic, computer and science.
This mobile school, which was officially approved by the Ministry of Education and in coordination with the executive management of the IDP's unit, is an educational window that contributes to helping displaced students to continue their education after suffering that lasted for years.
We thank the people in the Rahma Association in Kuwait for the involvement in the education of children and decreasing illiteracy rate in the displacement camps, as we have nearly 6 camps deprived from education totally. Now, nearly 100 students in primary levels have been registered in this project.
A sign of hope reflected by this mobile school among the displacement camps, which alleviates many of the needs of the displaced students and helps them achieve their dreams of continuing education in the camps and challenging the difficult conditions imposed by the war on Yemenis years ago.
Yemeni Minister of Planning reiterated that economic losses from the war exceeded $126 billion. The minister confirmed that the war led to a contraction of the gross domestic product by about 50%. He pointed out that the deficit rose to about 15% of GDP in 2016. Taxes fell by 30% and oil revenues declined by 80%. Since the beginning of the civil war in 2014, Yemeni households have seen their income slashed, while prices of basic food supplies and essential commodities have risen. Economic activities have virtually ground to a halt. Oil and gas production and exports are falling.
With the conflict continuing in 2022, the value of the Yemeni riyal continues to drive large increases in food prices and pushing more people into extreme poverty. Socioeconomic conditions are deteriorating rapidly, further affected by declining remittance, trade disruption, severe fuel supply shortages, and the disruption and declining humanitarian operations. Economic prospects in 2022 and beyond will critically depend on rapid improvements of the political and security situation. Improved monetary supervision and policy controls could reduce currency exchange instability and temporarily limit abstract activities, with possible gains in the relative value of the US dollar in the South. The United Nations has called for urgent support to the Yemeni economy to maintain the stability of the collapsed local currency and to avoid a complete collapse of basic services facilities in the poor Arab country, which has been racked by a bloody war for 7 years. The Yemeni currency continued its rapid decline, reaching its slowest level ever against the dollar in the unofficial exchange market transactions. According to the United Nations, Yemen is suffering the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. It's facing unprecedented financial and economic pressures and difficulties due to the decline in oil revenues, which constitute 70% of the country's revenues, as well as the suspension of all foreign aid.
The National Committee Against Coronavirus recorded 8 new cases of the pandemic. Committee officials said 10 recovered cases were recorded and 3 deaths. With the current updates, the total confirmed cases are 11,707, including 2,113 cases of death and 8,543 cases of recovery. Here is a reminder of the main headlines. During his briefing to the Security Council, Hans Garber confirmed that peace in Yemen requires uncomfortable compromises. The United Nations warns that aid cuts for Yemen will aggravate humanitarian crisis in the country. For 7 years now, Tribe has proven to be a considerable force in the battle against Houthi militia. This is the end of the news. For more, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at Yemen Today English. This is Roshan Fouad. Thank you for watching.